Welcome to my virtual diner. Pull up a seat at the counter. Get comfortable. Most shows talk about the people, I talk to them. This is Real America with me, Bridget Phetasy. All right, welcome back. Last week we talked about education and like all the discussions we have on Real America. We barely got started on the topic because there's so much to say. Today, with the news about a school shooting, the topic takes on a whole new gravity. And that's not what we're here to talk about specifically, but I also didn't want to dance around it because it's definitely at the very front of all of our minds. News feeds, everything. My heart goes out to the families, the victims, the injured, and to America. Words feel absolutely meaningless when confronting tragedies like this, so I'm not even going to try. For me, the best I can do is pray. Whatever helps you, I hope you do it. There's an expression I use a lot, in particular when it comes to our media. You don't hear about the planes that land, meaning we only hear and focus on the bad news. Tonight, I want to focus a bit on some good news. As my guest last week, Erica Sanzi, mentioned in our discussion about education, it's not all negative. A large portion of parents are happy with their child's school. My guest tonight is Ravi Gupta. He's the co-founder of Arena Summit and founder and CEO of The Branch, a nonprofit media company based on the metaphor of an olive branch. It's an image you'll find throughout a lot of his commentary, which is why I wanted to have him on. He was a school principal. He's also done a lot of work with charter schools. His recent article, The Inconvenient Success of New Orleans Schools, was so fascinating and profound, and I cannot wait to talk to him about it tonight. He spent months in New Orleans interviewing people about Carver High School, which became a flashpoint for school reform in post-Katrina Louisiana. What he discovered is amazing and tricky and potentially transformative on a national level. But like most debate about education, the results have been met with indifference or silence. He looks at how partisan politics are breaking this country, and it's largely because stories like this don't get attention. So I really want to get to talking to Ravi because he has so much wisdom and experience on this. But first, some quick housekeeping. If you want to be called on, you need to be on Zoom on camera, and you need to virtually raise your hand by clicking the reactions button. If you aren't on Zoom and want to be a part of our virtual live audience right now or in the future, click the link in the description below to get a Zoom link or go to tway.tv/Bridget Zoom. The Zoom link is the same every time, so save it somewhere. It is your virtual diner. The voice of God you will hear is cousin Maggie. Many of you already know her.
Hello, everyone.
She's my cousin and co-producer. We make a lot of stuff together, like our other shows, Dumpster Fire, Walk-ins Welcome, and all the other content you can find at Phetasy.com. Maggie is monitoring the chat, and if you have something to say and you raise your hand, she will message you privately to find out what you'd like to talk about. She's going to help make sure that we stay on topic. Don't be offended if she interrupts me or you to keep things moving. We can't guarantee we'll get to everybody, but we will do our best. And everyone knows my number one rule is don't be a dick. So please be kind to each other in the chat. Try to be the change you wish to see in the chat or online. And now a word from our sponsor, a very quick word from our sponsor, Quest. How well informed are you about your health? If you want to make your health a priority, you can bypass waiting weeks for an appointment to see your doctor and maybe having to get a referral to see another doctor and go straight to questhealth.com. Quest helps you cut through all the insurance nonsense and get the tests you need when you need them. Quest offers over 150 of the same tests trusted by doctors, including diagnostics for specific ailments like STDs, chronic conditions like heart, liver, and kidney disease, as well as testing that is almost never covered by health insurance like fertility and advanced women's hormone testing. Quest also offers broad packages of tests that go way beyond the standard tests you typically get in an annual medical checkup visit. Concierge medicine and functional medicine doctors, acupuncture, etc., will charge up thousands of dollars for these types of workups. Quest offers them for the price of a night out on the town. Your health and well-being is worth it. Visit questhealth.com and use the discount code REALMAY25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com. Use the code REALMAY25 for 20% off. All right, let's get into it. I have so many questions for our guest Ravi. Let's bring him up and get his perspective on schools. It's back to school. Ravi, welcome to Real America.
I'm excited to be here, Bridget. I love the set.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's I love it too. I was bucking against the like flat aesthetic of just neutral tones, and I wanted to go with the diner theme. So thank
Love it.
you. I appreciate that. How are you doing?
I'm not bad. As I was telling you offline, I'm gearing up for a move. I'm going to Italy to learn to cook this year. So, I'm in touch with the American people with my lifestyle, just jetting off to Tuscany. I
I
all
mean,
these
some Americans do this.
so
Like
many of
Jimmy
my
Kimmel. Maybe he'll
yes,
be your neighbor.
so many of my friends in the sort of media space and political space are like, I got to go to a diner in the Midwest to better understand the pulse of America. I'm like heading off to Tuscany to learn to make pasta.
I mean, speaking of education, though, the one thing I do love about you, among many things, is that you are always learning a you have a thing like learn a new skill every year, right?
Yeah, that's what this year is. This is the year I learned to cook. But yeah, I have a book coming out in a year about it. But I just finished the book, so I won't actually be able to write about this experience for that. But the ever since I was a school principal, which is I know what we'll talk about, I left that job, but I still had this like desire to keep learning and really to turn my lessons in education on myself. And so I learned to power lift and I did, learn screenwriting, novel writing, tennis, surfing, all this kind of stuff. And I always have like a big project at the end of the year that's like my big test at the end of the year. And so that's like, and that's, this year it's, going to a culinary school, but it's like, I do that every year, and it's also my way to kind of keep up with the different like evolution of learning. And
Yeah.
because I actually, a lot has changed since 2016 when I left running schools.
Yeah. How did you get into running schools?
So essentially, I worked Obama's first campaign when I was in my early 20s. And then I worked in the administration as a diplomat at the United Nations. And I had like a Devil Wears Prada moment where I just kind of like metaphorically threw my BlackBerry into the water fountain, and I had this realization that I was successful on paper. Like everybody's like, like at that time it was one of the most successful things you could do is to like get a nice job in the Obama administration, but I felt like I wasn't being tested in any real ways, and I was riding the wave of like enthusiasm for Obama, but I wasn't independently striking out, and I also wasn't passing the It's a Wonderful Life test. If I stepped out, there would be another eager Ivy Leaguer to take my place, and so there's a long version of the story, but the short version is I was in touch with the mayor of Nashville, Tennessee at the time, and he wanted to take over the school system there. He failed because the city council blocked him. So he then started to raise money for charter schools, and he tapped me to run the first charter school he started. And I started at North Nashville, and I started as a middle school. And at North Nashville, I had, and it might still have, the highest incarceration rate for black males in the entire country. And It was a tough neighborhood for student outcomes. Fewer than 1% of kids were getting a college-ready ACT, and so I started a school there. We did extremely well. We got a lot of funding, both from the federal government, but from philanthropists, and we expanded. And then I went on to Mississippi, where I started their first charter school, and I did all of that in 6 years. I started six schools in 6 years, and then I left, came back up to New York, and have been working in politics, media, and journalism ever since. But I still cover, as you know, education a lot because I think it's one of the areas least well understood and most poorly covered by the media.
Yeah, it does seem like I feel like I was reading somewhere that Mississippi has been having a lot of successes as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's
tell
it.
us about that.
You look at Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana, they each have related but different stories to tell about how you can do some pretty good things at the state level, and I would throw in a little bit of Florida. The evidence is less clear on Florida, but I do think over the next few years we'll find out some interesting stuff about some of the changes down there. But uh, but in Mississippi, they did two things really well. unrelated to the work I was doing. Like I started charters, but there are not many charters there. My network, I think, has more than half of all charter schools in Mississippi. I say my network, I don't run it anymore, but the one I started. So and that's not driving the change in Mississippi. Charters are driving the change in Tennessee and definitely in Mississippi, in Louisiana, as I'll talk about. But in Mississippi, it was changes to their reading program. They were ahead of this sold a story level, like core knowledge, phonics, uh, reading instruction. They were way ahead on that. The second thing they did really well was they created I think it's fourth grade, they created a gate. So if you do not meet basic competencies in the fourth grade, you are held back. And so it's this sort of pressure that keeps everybody honest at the level of fourth grade. And other states that have tried to replicate that have also started to see some success. And I just interviewed the former minister of education under Rishi Sunak in the United Kingdom, and they had a similar policy and saw similarly strong results there, where they had these gates at various points. And so that's Mississippi, but Tennessee um, and Louisiana have other stories to tell. But it's interesting. Three states with some of the toughest student populations in the country in terms of poverty have seen some pretty dramatic gains.
What metrics do you use to judge the success of school reform?
Yeah, I think there are a few. It's you have to go kind of in order of the easiest to measure to the hardest to measure. And so Louisiana is a good example where I went to New Orleans and I tried to actually look at it at every possible level, everything from the easier to measure, which would be things like graduation rates, test scores, college going statistics, uh, parent satisfaction, attrition rates. Those are like some easy to measure things, and there are different ways you could dice those. New Orleans is the best because they have this institute at Tulane that takes all the data and then like basically red teams it and is like, well,
Mhm.
what if the population changed? What if the rest of the state grew faster than the city, even if the city grew fast? So they ask all these questions and then they spit out these reports that are really good at that. There are also some sophisticated student growth measures now, depending on where you are. Tennessee is the best at this. They have what's called value added, but now Stanford comes in and measures certain cities. They have this institute called Credo that creates a statistical match. So they'll be like, Bridget, 16 years old, parents at this level of income. She lives in this neighborhood. She had these previous academic scores. I'm going to create a statistical match to you at a different school, and now we're going to measure how you both do and who improves faster. And so that's like a more sophisticated way to take test scores and say, how are you doing better? Now, those are like what I would say are the equivalent of like your blood pressure reading at the doctor,
Right.
right? It tells you, like, the way I look at those is like it tells you if something's going very wrong, right? So like it won't tell you, are you super healthy? Like if you have good blood pressure, that's not like, okay, this person's an elite athlete or anything like that. Maybe the growth scores are the equivalent of like body fat or something. Like they're probably a better metric, but still not telling you everything. But if they're poor, it tells you something's going really wrong. That's how I view test scores, right? They're just like a basic check in the system. Now, there are other things, and England has a really good system. It's called the Ofsted system, where they have these really excellent, well-trained inspectors. And I know inspector sounds bureaucratic, but they're really good, and they come in and they write these reports about whether your school's looking well or not. I basically recreated that in New Orleans, where I've been going in and out of New Orleans since 2010. And so I could, like, through my own experience, be able to go into a school and be like, that's a hot mess. That's a good school. That's a bad school.
Uh-huh.
And you could figure it out pretty quickly, both journalistically, but also from like just like a, experience test. And a lot of what I reported on was trying to take the objective data and map it onto my reporting and my experience, and also the words and experiences of parents and kids to say, holistic experience here from most objective to most subjective. Where are things lining up? And the interesting thing about New Orleans is almost every one of those elements were pointing in the direction of pretty significant improvement since the years before Katrina.
Yeah. That it I feel like you have so much experience inside the education system, and I'm wondering what's one thing that every American should understand about it? because like you said, there's the way the media reports on it isn't great, which I would like to get into as well. But what's something that you feel like Americans don't really understand about the education system?
Whew. Well, I think it depends on which American I'm talking to. So maybe I'll create
This
two.
is this is a Civil War movie meme. Like,
Yeah.
what America are you from?
Well, let me create two caricatures. So the first caricature I would say is the progressive white woman. No offense to any of you in the audience if you're there. Although if you're in Bridget's audience, I'm sure I'm not the first to offend you if you're a progressive white woman. But the
How dare you, sir?
but these were some of my biggest opponents when I was running schools, and there are neighborhoods all over the country. East Nashville, where I lived, in Nashville, here in Brooklyn, down a couple neighborhoods over in Park Slope and Upper West Side. There are these people who have these proud public school parent signs in front of their houses, and they look in the mirror and they see people who are fighting for equity and who are fighting for the system. So their intentions are usually good. But what I would say to them is that what you th- the what you argue for in neighborhood school, right, is a myth, right? Like the idea that there's this Pleasantville neighborhood school where you say hi to the mailman, walking your kid to school, and it's a glistening, beautiful school is is only there for people who create these walled off neighborhoods that attach property value to the quality of the school. And often the quality of the school has nothing to do with how good the instruction is and how much freedoms we give to the leader to drive a vision and strong curriculum choices. It just has to do with aggregating a bunch of people who have a lot of resources and who have stable households and who have parents who drive them like to do certain things, and then you put them all in school, they're all going to do well, right?
Mhm.
And so when those people oppose school choice, which I'm sure we'll get to, which can mean charter schools, it can mean vouchers, it can mean a lot of different things, even just loosening up neighborhood boundaries, right, which is a
Yeah.
form of school choice that progressives should be behind. Like, you'd be shocked that they're not always behind that. uh, I would say to them is when you oppose school choice, you're opposing all the people you claim to stand with, the black and brown families in North Nashville, right? The Latino families in the Rio Grande Valley, whatever. Like those families overwhelmingly support the forms of school choice you don't, because they don't have the Pleasantville experience. They're trapped in Pearl Cohen High School in North Nashville. That's fewer than 1% of kids attending college. So
Right.
so that's what I would say to them. I would say to the and I actually did say this the other week, and I went to a gathering of voucher supporters, and I'm like as pro voucher and education savings account, like me private school choice of any Democrat I've ever met, honestly. And but what I said to them was, um, if you just create a laissez-faire environment, uh, totally free market environment, um, there are going to be massive, massive costs and consequences. And I use Texas as an example, your home state, where I said to
Now.
them, yeah, we're now there, and they've just passed a law to allow education savings accounts. And I said, look, because I support them, but with certain like guardrails that are very much mirror what I saw in New Orleans, which is I still have a role for the government in regulating them in a non-intrusive way, but in a way that prevents charlatans from taking over, but and allows parents to have some transparency of data and equity for students with special needs and things like that. But what I said was like there are places like Texas that are like a good test case where you have these towns where there's one high school. Now you
Mhm.
start handing out checks to people to go to private schools in those towns. Now what's happening to Friday football? What's happening to band? What's happening to the finances of that school? And I think it's really important when we talk about parents' rights and all this kind of stuff to ground that in reality. Because of course we want parents' rights, but we also have to be fiscally responsible. You have to take budgetary concerns into consideration, and you have to take the community, like the concept of change management and community management seriously. Like if overnight a Texas school that's already struggling with enrollment loses 20% of its kids, you have to have a plan for that. Now, it doesn't mean you don't go through with your plan, but you need to know what that is going to mean for that community. And I'm not sure they've done that work yet. So that's what I would say to that side of the equation.
Yeah, that seems to be happening anyway. Even when I was and just because there aren't as many kids. So even when I was back home in Rhode Island talking to family members, there was a soccer league that one of my friends' kids was going to be on, and then there just weren't enough girls, and there weren't enough parents who could really help with the coaching. And so this seems, even in places where people are just normally going to public schools and they don't even have the option, to be a problem without adding school choice to it.
Yeah, and I think our schools are a symptom of our politics. Because like
Hmm.
obviously if you have broken politics, eventually it's going to cascade down to the institutions our politicians are poised to run. Like, and it's I find it hard to look around at our national politics and find anybody anymore who has a vision for education. It used to be, and people could argue that this was a bad vision, and I'm sure some people will ask about this. There was a bipartisan consensus pretty much from Clinton to George W. Bush to Obama on certain questions of education. And I actually think it was worthy of debate and discussion. And there were certain people like Elizabeth Warren who started challenging those assumptions. Uh, but they were, the teachers union, Randy Weingarten, for instance, hated that consensus. But it was a consensus grounded in an actual vision of where to take schools. And what wound up happening was things were improving in a certain kind of way. And they were also, and I would also say some of the challenges were accumulating in a certain kind of way, but at least things were moving in a direction. Like people could say, all right, we have a coherence to our system. Like things started to make a certain kind of sense. Now, I have 1,000 critiques of how I would change that consensus, but at least I could tell you what it was back then. Now I couldn't even tell you what it is anymore. And some people I really respect would say, okay, well, that means now we can just create a permissionless, chaotic, laissez-faire system where 1,000 flowers bloom and all that. And maybe they're right. But I think, like, even if they are right, which I think it's certainly not a given, there's going to be a lot of chaos and damage along the way because kids only get one chance at third grade, right? And so
Hmm.
parents, I think, are inherently small c conservative when it comes to schools because change is really scary for parents. Like
Yeah.
the idea that the school down the street from them would shutter, even if the school is like kind of lame, is a scary proposition to families.
Yeah, and like they were mentioning on our program last week, their charter schools don't always have buses, or especially the private ones. So now you have two parents who are working, and they're at least with public school, you get them on a bus. You don't have to drive them and wait. And these, I swear, all I ever hear about now is just the lines to pick up your child and from anything. And there's also a weird there aren't pickup games anymore. My family always talks about how you have to sign your kid up for all these sports. You used to have neighborhoods and the kids could just kind of play, and now everybody's in sports and you go, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna be like Lenore Skenazy, a mutual friend of ours,
I was
and
just going to
let
mention her.
let the
Yeah.
kids have their free time and play, but then you feel pressured to put your kid in a sport because all their friends are in sports and you don't want them to be left out of the sports their friends are all playing. And so some of it is, I don't know how you get outside of that. I'm not sure if it's like
It's culture.
capitalism or what, like
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
I
And it's
think
so expensive. It's insanely expensive. It's crazy. And every parent I know is driving all the time, everywhere, going to hockey and soccer. And now it's all like year-round sports. It's crazy. This is not how it was when I grew up.
I'll make a radical point because I don't have kids yet, but my experience was running school, so being in charge of kids for a certain amount of time during the day. And I stopped in 2016, so things got a lot worse after that. I was kind of like in the beginning stages of what Jonathan Haidt was writing about. And but also like the kids I served, interestingly enough, because they came from high poverty neighborhoods, because they were often single moms at home, like my mom she worked two jobs, my mom was a nurse. But I was in the 90s growing up, so it was like mom was working all the time, and the culture was just to walk outside and play basketball all day, which is basically what I spent all
Right.
my time on. So So the kids in my neighborhood, and I haven't really tested this recently, but they would play outside and their parents running around and they had the kind of free range environment just by culture of like a lot of low income neighborhoods and sort of intergenerational households, grandma, yada yada yada. Like that's kind of how our neighborhoods were. But I think the higher you go up the income scale, even to get to lower middle income and up in America, by and large, culturally, yeah, I think somebody said, I think it was Murphy in the chat that like childhood is monetized. And
Yeah.
that's cultural. I think I sent you this piece I wrote about how we've walked away from the Gen X values of not selling out. I think everybody's
Yep.
selling out. Like everything has to be, I'm charging you. So it's like instead of having my kids come over, like they come over and I'll watch the kids, it's like I'm running a daycare. Everybody's got to do shit. Like and everybody's got to charge for something. And I think like that's a cultural thing. And honestly, like,
I'm not gonna lie, I made 6 amazing looking muffins today, and I was like, "I could sell these."
yeah, there you go. So I think like part of this is we've got to decide what our values are,
Yeah.
and at a certain point,
I gave them away for the record.
no, of course you did. So it's like, but I think we've got to start to fight back. And I think Lenora is obviously the leading edge of a larger discussion that we
Mm,
need to have that has to be much broader than the points that she's making, but she's making them quite well in the area that she is. And it's going to take really bold action. Some people just leave. Like I have friends who moved to like South America or something, where I spend a lot of time in South America surfing, and then the towns I hang out in, the kids are just wandering around. They don't have phones. They're surfing. They're chasing dogs. They built a basketball court in my town down there, and the kids and there's a skate park next to it, and the kids just
yeah,
go after school to the skate park and basketball, and then at sunset they walk to the beach. Some of them surf, some of them don't, and it reminds me so much of the 90s. I'm like,
yeah.
this is awesome. And like hopefully you don't have to move to another country to
You don't.
get that.
I mean, even being back east, I think one of my siblings is my sisters and I were like, he's like raising his kids like the 90s, and they had like a 90s summer, and it was just a joy to be there. We went crabbing. It was like all the things we did when we were growing up. We just had cookouts and had the little things that you threw the like caps, and just it reminded me so much of my childhood, and they're giving them that, but it is very conscious and it is a lot of work for them. Like you have to be able to just like feed your kids 3 times a day. You're not just shipping them off to somewhere where they're having a lunch or whatever. It was really nice. And I also see that it's not exactly easy. It's because there isn't that cultural support. You're not like,
Yeah.
okay, go over to your friend's house for a few hours or run over there.
Yeah.
It's still pretty isolated to them. It's not like the whole neighborhood. Like when I was growing up in we moved all the time, but at one point we were in Connecticut, and we were talking about this when we were home, just how we got on our bikes. I was probably 11 or 12, which means the youngest sister who came with me to do this was probably 8. And we get on our bikes and ride to the point in Stonington, Connecticut, and get swim lessons at 7 a.m. by ourselves, the 3 of us. And we would be there all day. We would pack lunch. And eventually my mom would come with I'm the oldest of 5 with the 2 youngest. But that was not uncommon for you to see like a 12, a 10, and an 8-year-old riding their bikes, and the whole town was like that.
Yeah. And it was better. Like the thing is, like everybody jokes like, back in my day, it just was better. I'm sorry. Like
It was
I
better.
have no doubt about that. I'm as sure of that as anything in this world. And the kids know it too. I just went back to my
Mhm.
own high school and gave a speech at the end of the school year, and it's the only I hate boards. I've gone off of every board that I sit on just because it's like can suck up all your time. But I said to the principal at the end of this discussion after talking to kids, she'd been asking me to sit on this board forever. And I was like, I will sit on this board because I want to connect with these kids. I want to create environments where because they want it. Like these kids, they don't want
Yeah.
to stare at their phones all day. They read about our lives in the 90s, the way that we read, like Stand By Me and all these things. Like it's like you look back and you're like, oh, things were like cool. like, and they were like there's a lot of weird stuff that happened in the 90s, but like, and I think by extension the 80s, but like it was unquestionably an adventurous time to be alive, and it was
Yeah.
the apex of, you had enough technology so you can get on AOL and find out who's going to the mall, who was ever, but not so much technology that if you got to that mall, and they weren't there, and you weren't waiting by a phone, people weren't
Yeah.
texting, there was no bullying, you just kind of got lost. Like
I
you
mean,
had
there was
these,
bullying, but it
yeah.
was real life bullying.
Yeah, but it's kind of bullying that, honestly, I think, like, obviously dealing with digital bullying is its own skill, as you and I
Yeah.
both know, and you probably get it way more than I do, but I get it online all the time. And the first time I got bullied, actually, when I was running schools, I became a public figure in Nashville because I was a big leader fighting back against political leaders on education. I had a hard time dealing with online criticism, so that is like a thing I probably would have gotten more
Better
accustomed
at.
to if I lived in today's environment. But everything else, like even the concept of bullying, you deal with in a much better way in school in the 90s and all that. But you had these days, like I remember there was a kid in the neighborhood across from mine, and there was just one day, it must have been sixth or seventh grade. He shows up on his bike. He's a couple years older than me, and he's like the cool kid from across Victory Boulevard where I lived in Staten Island, and he was like the guy all the girls loved, and for some reason he just must have been bored. He came to my house, he's like, let's go. And there was this like abandoned like housing development all across Staten Island, and we rode our bikes there, we hung out all day, we became friends, and we've known each other ever since.
Yeah.
And like you'd have these days that just would last forever, and all you would do is talk to somebody and explore and be totally present.
Yeah.
And I think that's like really beautiful, and I hope we could find a way to get back to that.
Yeah, to we have a couple hands and I want to talk to them, but really quick, just explain how what happened in New Orleans, what you've seen in the 10 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years since Katrina. That's crazy. But
Yeah. So
it
let me do a speed, and for everything I'm talking about, there's a narrative podcast series that I am in the midway through releasing. It's called Where the Schools Went.
it's really good.
Yeah, and
I was saying to Maggie, I'm like, Ravi puts out really good content. It's
oh, thank
really
you.
good.
This was a labor of love, and so
Yeah.
people can listen to it. We're halfway through. We just put out an episode yesterday, all about the teachers and what happened to the teachers in New Orleans. But here's the short story. New Orleans is a school system that by 2004, so the year before Hurricane Katrina hits, is among the worst in the country. It's a coin flip whether your kid graduates from a high school in New Orleans in 2004. The school district was so corrupt that the commissioner, the superintendent of schools, wanted to audit his own school district, but the school board blocked him because they knew how much corruption he would find. The FBI set up an office in the school district because it was so corrupt, and they started indicting members. That's how corrupt it was. They wanted to set up their own office there because they knew it would be
Crazy.
more efficient. So that's Katrina on the eve. That's New Orleans on the eve of Katrina. Katrina hits, wipes out the entire school system, basically destroys all the buildings. And because the district was already insolvent, essentially before Katrina, they had no money to pay their teachers. They couldn't even create a buffer, so they lay off all their teachers, about 7,000 educators en masse. There is no school system pretty much that year after Katrina. And there was a little known state law that was passed a few years before that allowed the state to take over low performing schools. And lo and behold, basically all of New Orleans was low performing by their definitions. And they also started to finagle with the definitions so that they could take over all the schools. Long story short, they take over all the schools. They basically charter almost all of them. And I'm sure people are familiar with charters, but in New Orleans and in most states, charters are nonprofit institutions like mine that run schools independent of school districts, and usually have to meet, depending on the state, a series of benchmarks to succeed. In Louisiana, they're fairly stringent, and you have to, you know, achieve good test scores and graduation rates, and in some cases, they throw in parent satisfaction and attrition and attendance, like enrollment numbers. And what happened was they wound up chartering a bunch. Basically, they're about 80% charter, and they had an influx of outside talent, Teach for America, yada yada yada, outsiders, and insiders, but definitely more outsiders than ever before. And then they have ruthless accountability, so that the the way they governed schools was, hey, you get a couple years, but if you're slipping, we're going to close you,
Hmm.
and we're going to consolidate people, we're going to whatever. And that's about what the system looks like for 10 years. And they start achieving incredible results. And I write about this and we talk about it, like awesome results. But they also started to see some cracks in the system. Schools were gaming, like, and charters will do this. And this is why, like, what I was saying, what my conversation would be to my conservative friends about ESAs and vouchers. If you don't create mechanisms in the system, schools will game it in a way that there are tough kids and they don't take those tough kids, whether they have severe special needs
Right.
or emotional disturbances. And I just think that kids need a place to go to school. Like, you cannot have a system where nobody will take those kids. And that what was happening in New Orleans 10 years in. So they're achieving all these great results, but there are these problems. Their parents are confused because there's not one application system. So schools are throwing up barriers and trying to game it so they can get the right kids. Kids with special needs are having a hard time finding a good education. Transportation is a problem, all that. So 10 years in, they start solving all these problems, right? They create a one application system. They create like one of the most generous weighted funding formulas. So kids with special needs are getting a ton of funding. They created a common expulsion system so schools couldn't like monkey around with expulsions to kick out kids that shouldn't be kicked out. And so that's been the last 10 years of New Orleans. And they also have like gotten better at training teachers from New Orleans so that there was this big problem of legitimacy within the system where like politically the schools were explosive because they were being run by a lot of like white outsiders, which like for people who are like who gives a shit about identity politics, like which is generally my frame of mind, in that environment it was not tenable politically. Like the
Right.
schools were not politically viable in an environment where what was the black middle class, which was the teaching professions laid off overnight, and then they can't get jobs, and then they're getting resentful of this outside presence. So they started doing a better job of recruiting people locally. And what was cool is a lot of the people who came in, it was like a test, right? It's like the people who stayed, and they earned people's trust, and the people who left, uh, they left, so who cares? And then the other people in the neighborhood and stuff who got jobs, they all became one, and like now there's not these fights, there's not these wars anymore, and the results have been sustained and in some cases improved. And so you have dramatic increases, like, something like 50 something percent graduation rate to 70 something percent.
Wow.
Um, there were something like 2/3, and I could have this number wrong off the top of my head, but it's in my piece, the correct number. Something like 2/3 of schools were rated failing by the state pre-Katrina, zero now. Something like 28% increase in college going rates, parent increases of parent satisfaction numbers, and I go through all these things, and then my eye test, right? I talk about the school Carver, which I'd seen many times in its trajectory, was a very troubled school in 2004. Like sexual assaults happening in the school, the district had to create a whole task force about it. It had a 50% graduation rate. Now, is the highest student growth in the city. It has incredible college. I ran into a kid in the hallways who's going to Princeton. That it met my eye test. It was a beautiful, orderly school that was happy. Had state championship basketball teams, award-winning marching band, and that's changed. But as I wrote about in this piece that you're talking about, the Atlantic wrote two articles about Carver 10 years ago because there were fights going on about Carver. So it
Right.
was a juicy story. So they're like, oh, the community is fighting with the charter people. And it was a beautiful story from their perspective. It's like juicy, right? To my knowledge, has never written about it since. And the real story is today. The real story
Right.
is like, wow, those people got together, they solved their problem, and
Mm,
now they've created this beautiful school that is in the ninth ward of New Orleans, which is like one
mhm.
of the toughest places to run a public school, and it's thriving.
That's amazing.
That's a story, right?
Yeah.
But they don't want to write that story.
Yeah. No one wants the feel good stories.
Right.
Or even it's like you say in the piece that I think is so important. It's politically inconvenient to both sides.
Yeah.
It's not it doesn't they had like federal help in a concentrated burst, right?
Yeah, let me explain that really quickly, and then I see a lot of eager questions, so I definitely want to get to some of those people.
Yeah.
So here's why it's inconvenient. For Democrats, it's obvious. There's no teachers union. There's no like they basically distilled so many of the functions of the central system down to the schools to make those decisions, which for reasons I'm a Democrat, but for reasons that baffle me, Democrats don't like that kind of stuff. Hopefully that stuff will change. Um, and also the neighborhood school stuff I was talking about. Like you can go to basically any school in the city if you want to, right? And that creates its own challenges, but they decide they care more about equity, to use a term that Democrats like to use, than they do convenience,
Mhm.
right? And that was an important decision. It's not, doesn't mean it's the right decision. It just means they were clear about their priorities. So that's why it's inconvenient. Democrats still never talk about it. Obama was the last Democrat to talk about it. He loved talking about New Orleans, by the way. Like, he was obsessed with it. And then you have, for Republicans, there was a version of Republicans where this would be their bread and butter, like the Jeb Bush Republican Party. Now, Lamar Alexander, Bill Haslam Republican Party. This Republican Party doesn't like this because it actually is a functioning, awesome school system. It shows that actually there's some middle ground between the way we're doing things now, which is this like sclerotic mess of a school system that we do now that they like to beat up on for good reason, and I largely cheer them on as they criticize those problems. And then this like totally laissez-faire handout checks to people to go wherever they want without any regulation and no state testing and no guardrails for students with disabilities or anything. And this is inconvenient to them because actually, if you do a limited but important role for government and increase funding, which was part of the equation, it didn't drive the results on their own. But when you increase funding and give people the power to spend it on the ground, that combination is very powerful, right?
Right.
With accountability, right? So it's not like the hospice system in Arizona, right? Where like you're handing out these checks and then people are creating these front organizations and stealing money and stuff like that.
They're
Like
getting
this was like,
trampolines.
yeah, this was like real accountability with
Yeah.
it, right?
Interesting.
So,
It's such a good story.
so that's how it is. And like, and I don't think those are equal. Like I don't stack up the Republicans and Democrats on this question equally. If I'm being honest, I think things that have happened over the last year, I think have maybe brought them to a little bit more equal because I think there's some truly insane things happening on the education front lately. But if you were to ask me a year ago, I would say that the problems of our public education is 90-10 the problem of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I would have said. I'm starting to get a little closer to 50-50 now because of some of the things that have been happening lately.
Like,
Um,
let's talk to some people, but I do want to know like what some of the things are that
yeah, yeah, we can get to
but
that
let's
for sure.
let's
Okay.
let's hear from the people.
I'm going to bring up Amy.
Hi, Amy.
I did.
Well, let's see.
I've got a notepad.
She's ready.
I've got a notepad up. Yeah, I'm ready so I don't ramble today. So I know we already said we're not going to carry on about what happened in Minnesota today, but for the person who waxes on about how I try to stay away from the news cycle, I found out about it because the CEO of our company, which is headquartered in Egan, sent out an email today saying, in light of the tragedy.
Mhm.
And I'm like, what tragedy? And, I just read I wouldn't have even known if it weren't for work informing me.
Mm.
Like, I'm in northern Minnesota, but the headquarters is in Egan.
Yeah.
And I feel awful. And I think that it's prescient to just
Acknowledge it.
acknowledge it.
Yeah, I know. It's always
Awful.
weird doing anything. Like I was saying to my husband, should I just cancel? And
I almost
and then
wondered.
and then he said, you would get nothing done in America. And I was like,
For sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, he was half kidding, I think, but he was also like, his point was like, there are tragedies all over the world all the time too. So
It's just when it moves closer and closer
I know.
and closer.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
Yeah. So, but I won't carry on about it. But I did think that was odd that I wouldn't have known until maybe the next dumpster fire if it weren't for our CEO.
We don't cover this stuff on Dumpster Fire. We try to make people laugh.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Well, I'll hear it somewhere. Regardless, I have some better things. No. And I'm sorry that it's not directly related to the topic that you guys were talking about because I've never really noticed it being too political in our school systems in Minnesota. Minnesota is known for having a very, very good education system.
Mhm.
And I would just like to share a little history on why northern Minnesota in particular had the most turn of the century schools. The mining companies invested in beautiful, beautiful schools in the turn of the century for all of our little mining towns. And those were
Sorry, I
all
thought you were gonna say all of our little minors.
No.
Like,
all of our
just
little
imagine
minor
all
children.
these children,
Yeah.
minors.
Minor children.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Double entendre. I get it. But yeah, so they really invested in that. And so we had great buildings, not only that, but somehow we ended up with, I mean, truly good educators. I had a coach who was also a fourth grade teacher, and I had heard the joke that you hear eventually in your life about um, it's there's three good things about being a teacher, June, July, August. And she said to me, if that's the only reason for being a teacher, then you don't belong being a teacher. So that's kind of the overall, I mean, the teachers in our school district, for the most part, from what I know, really do care about teaching. And then just recently, they combined like three towns. So I live in Virginia. I graduated from Evelyn Gilbert, which is already combined because the towns have been getting smaller as the mining has dissipated. It's still active, but people aren't having big families. Anyhow, so they combined them all. They tore down those beautiful schools, which my heart wants to break. When every time I look up the hill to see my old school and it's a vacant lot, it's tragic in my opinion. But they built a beautiful state-of-the-art school. I go to it once a week to volunteer for United Way for the Lunch Buddies program, which is just it's an opportunity to just be a friend to a child that's not a parent or a teacher, and they can learn that they can trust somebody, but then they can learn how to say goodbye, you know, but it's very rewarding. So, I mean, they do have some programs in place that I think they're looking out for the kids. Um, but mainly what I wanted to talk about was, and I know you guys covered it last week, I was cramming, pun intended, by trying to get caught up on last week's episode. But so I have a niece who should be going into 11th, 10th or 11th grade this year. And so she would have been during COVID about 10, 11, 12, wasn't in school. Here's a phone, here's an iPad. I just think it screwed them up so bad. I mean, I think phones in general did, but so she's going to a different school. She just happened to move with her mom. And so she's in a different school district in Hibbing now. So that's just like 30 minutes away. Well, they just announced a few weeks ago that they are going no phones. And I think that as much of a Sisyphean battle as it's going to be, it needed to be done years ago. Because I see mental health issues with her, but I only see her. But she doesn't have the ability to focus on anything other than her phone. It's, and I'm sure Jonathan Haidt, I listen to his stuff. He's covered it extensively, that it is turning kids' brains to mush, especially that like very delicate group that really was affected by that and, came into the age where just cell phones are the only thing that matter. And so what I was thinking was, I mean, they're going to implement the policy, but I wonder what kind of mental health fallout, like, and I'm not saying it's mature, but what kind of fallout and mental health crises, if you will, there will be when they have to learn how to function without their phone. And
Yeah.
I would guess that some of them subconsciously maybe want a break from their phone. But, I really hope that the teachers are up to that task, um, because I think it's so important, so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have to hold strong. I think like what happens is like a day like today happens, and I think there are some bad faith arguments or well-intentioned silly arguments, like like people who are not in that school. Like let's put aside the school itself, right? Because there's all kinds of studies about whether phones in the hands of kids actually make people safer or not, and it's not as definitive as people think. And in some cases, it could be the opposite of what people assume. But there'll be these arguments, and I see these all the time that, well, what if that happened in our school? Like, wouldn't the kid need their phone? And like, you start to game it out, like, what are they going to do with their phone? Like, are you gonna call it, like, they call you while the thing's going on, and what is that going to do other than make them more conspicuous and confuse first responders even more? And also that we have to have trade-offs, right? Like like obviously we could put every kid in a bubble and they'll be more safe, quote unquote, but they'll also be really poorly adjusted. And obviously we've been running this experiment with kids. And honestly, it's unfathomable to me that any schools have allowed phones,
Ever.
even back then we used to check the phones back in 2016. So like, we would have the kids, if you bring your phone in, we'd have a little lockbox that the
Mm.
teacher would put them in plastic bags with names, and we'd give them back to the kids at the end of the day. Parents could call. We all went through school. Parents call the front office. We call you up. We have little, systems to get you to where you need to go if the parent needs to talk to you. Everybody's in the same place. It's not hard to get in touch with people if you really need to get in touch with them. We've all been through this before. There's just a lot of silly arguments about it. And Amy, I think the detox won't be as crazy as you think. I think from what I hear, most people report really positive immediate effects where kids are actually happy about it too. And the adults just need to be strong about keeping up, because there'll always be a small percentage of parents who try to push back against the system. And a good school is going to be able to respectfully push back against those parents and say, look, I understand your concerns. And this is why I like school choice, because schools can then say to a parent, hey, if you don't like our policy, you can go to some school that allows phones, right? And whatever crazy school that is where the kids are sitting on their phones, go for it, right? The challenge becomes if there's only one option.
Our schools are kind of competitive, and now that they combine so many school districts into one, um, well, there's Hibbing or there's Rock Ridge, which is the
Yeah.
next one over. So, and they
Uh,
like to be competitive. So now that they implemented it, I'm sure it's coming down anyways. And I hope
All
that
right.
it's for the positive.
Sorry to
Oh,
interrupt,
no
guys.
problem.
We've got a rash of hands that just got raised,
Oh,
and I do want to try and get to a couple more people. We're running out of time, but thank you, Amy, so much.
of course.
Amy,
Yes.
thank
Good
you.
to
See you
talk to
again
you. Nice to see
soon.
you.
All right. I'm going to bring up Season next. We're going to have to try and keep it fast here, guys, so that we can try and get to everyone. Here we go. Hi, Season.
Hi.
Hello.
A list so I could get through this quickly. I don't know if I'm going to be the only person talking that has children, that kind of really does matter. Because I have, I used to be a teacher. I got certified in 2005. No Child Left Behind was in full swing when I got certified. And I saw what it was doing to the public schools. I had substitute taught in Pittsburgh City Schools for 2 years. And I was like, oh, I want to be a teacher. And then I got certified at my local public school that is actually the district I live in now. And I was like, this is disgusting. Like the testing regime was systematically pulling the entire system apart. So I was like, okay, I can't do this. So I quit teaching. I did eventually get married and I had 3 kids. I have one child who's 16 now, who's been in the system, who is atypical and is autistic. And it's been absolute hell. I'm just going to be honest. She actually wants to make a documentary about her entire system, like her experience in the public school system, eating disorders, all of the things that happen to special needs kids, even with IEPs. So I have 3 kids. One is older. The oldest is 18 now. Middle child is 16. The youngest is 13. I can honestly tell you, we have done everything the American education system has to offer. We've done charter schools. We've done online charter schools. We've homeschooled. We've unschooled. We've done private school. I now have 2 kids that are in a Christian classical school. Best decision I ever made in my life. And then my middle child, again, she was at a charter school for special needs only kids, first one in the country, Spectrum Charter School. I think it's still the only one in the country that does what it does. She was there for 3 years, but because the kids with the major behavior issues cannot be removed from the school because of the IEPs, she wanted to leave because she wasn't being challenged enough. So the charter school was okay, but now then the charter school got to the point where she was getting sexually harassed. There were a bunch of issues with the kids behaviorally that they refused to deal with because everybody has an IEP. So we've kind of done every single thing that the education system has to offer at this point. I mean, quite literally, we've run the entire gambit, and I used to be a teacher. So my thoughts are at this point in time, having also dealt with like the worst school district school board on the planet where I live right now, that like I am at the point where I've gone into like C. Bradley Cooper territory where I'm just like, I would just like to see the entire system stop entirely. Like I'm done with paying taxes to my local school district. I'm not even into the voucher thing at this point. because I so very much don't want to give any money to this school district for what it did to my child, that like I'm kind of done with public ed overall. And I can like listen to people make arguments in favor of it, and all the problems that come up don't surprise me in the least, because I've seen all of it in and out of public schools as a teacher with my own children. And I'm like, it's the system that's the problem. And it's because it's government run. It doesn't matter how good the teachers are. It's the system. It's a Prussian model. It is not American education. It is a European model that we follow. And we used to have a system before we adopted the Prussian model. We had our own education system. What we're doing right now is not American education. It is a European model, and we're just, it's like imploding everywhere. Like our school board literally said in the last time we had a race in spring, told one of the people running when he asked, well, you can't just keep raising taxes. And they said, yes, we can. There's no limit on how many taxes we can raise here. We're the 4th highest millage in Allegheny County and or outside of Pittsburgh right now. And what do we get in exchange for that is a single A school that caused my child to have an eating disorder. Like, I can't even look at the system and be like, yeah, I want to keep paying into this. No, I don't care what the results are. I don't care. I don't care about vouchers. I don't care about school choice. I want my money to be kept. I want my money. I want to stop paying taxes. I got to a point where I was like really believing in public ed. And then I saw like I'm sacrificing my children to be in this system because I really believe in public ed. And I realized I was sacrificing my children's education, that I only had one shot to do well with. And then I just got kind of selfish about it. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to pay into this system anymore, because it's failing over and over and over again. And the only time it gets repaired is when private sector solutions are applied. And the private sector is already doing that. So why don't I just stick my kids in private school? And so I'm getting taxed out the wazoo. And now I'm paying private tuition because my public school cannot do what the private sector does. It just cannot. And I'm just frustrated with the whole system, because I'm like, no, I don't want to pay school taxes anymore. I would like to be the first American that gets out of paying school taxes, because it's a system I don't like. That's just where I'm at right now. I'm done.
It's good.
I'm done. I'm just
we need
done.
to hear these perspectives.
I don't want to pay for it anymore.
Yeah, just
Other
really quick.
people's kids too. I don't want to pay. Are those people going to pay for my kids' private school? It's a Christian classical school. No. And I would never ask them to. So I'm just like, I don't even want to do school vouchers, because that's other people's money that you're taking and then making a school choice with. I think we should keep our money and then go send our kids where we want them to go. If people want to go back to common schools, where it's actually a small local school where the parents are directly involved, like we did before we adopted the Prussian model, fine. You want to go back to common schools like they had in Massachusetts? Go for it. That's fine.
All right, Susan, I want to give Robbie a chance to respond to you
I'm
before
done.
we go to someone else.
Yeah, and I'll just be really quick. Thank
It's
you
a
for
hot
all of
button
that.
issue for me, because I'm like really into this system. I've dealt with my school board a lot. They are the worst human beings I've ever had to deal with. And they shot me. I'm like done with this now because of them. They've just screwed up my kids so bad. Like, I'm just done.
Yeah, I sympathize in so many ways. I haven't gotten to, obviously, based on what I've said, to where you are, but I totally understand why you're frustrated. I think you mentioned about parents. Bridget, you're a parent, right? So I wanted to clarify that, because I think you were saying that.
Yeah, I am.
But I think you should listen to the episode next week. You won't agree with everything I say, but I do go through the whole Prussian model system, and you and I would be in agreement on that being probably a poor influence on our school system, and the uniformity it brought has been challenging. So that's our 4th episode. That'll drop on Tuesday. So I think you'll really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Susan. We're
Thank
going
you,
to bring up a
Susan.
couple more people here real fast. Wait. Ellen, I'm going to bring you up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Ellen. I am in Scottsdale, Arizona. And actually, I came on last week and talked about charter schools. And I really enjoyed that conversation and hearing all the different perspectives. I just had a quick question for Ravi. I was wondering, in comparing the charters in Louisiana, compared to the public schools, do they have that same level playing field? As I was talking last week about how charters here don't have to provide transportation. They don't necessarily have to have a cafeteria where they provide food. They can just like order in food. Teachers don't need to be certified. They have fees, somewhat voluntary fees that parents are expected to pay that are thousands of dollars. Do the charters in New Orleans have that same? Is it the same as public school, if that makes sense?
Yeah. On the latter point, they don't have the extra fees in
Okay.
Louisiana. If there are schools that do that, they have to be like, I don't. It might even be illegal there, but it certainly is
Mm,
not common.
okay.
Um, there are certain things charters can do that other schools don't have to do, and then there are other things, resources that the traditional schools get that the charters don't. And the
Mhm.
University of Arkansas did a study that kind of compared just the biggest thing, which is who gets more money,
Mhm.
and found that charters, and they looked at all charters generally, but I'm pretty sure I have to look at the crosstabs again, but we looked into it for the episode, that in Louisiana, this was even more true, is that the traditional schools were getting more money than the charters, even accounting for any philanthropy that they raise and any facilities funding that they get. So on the funding front, they get more. When it comes to things like the traditional schools get more, um, the direct run schools, especially, which there are few, but they're growing now. And actually, the control of the schools has gone back to the New Orleans Parish School Board, the entity that used to run
Okay.
the schools, and now they're directly running some schools. And the one that they just are using as their demonstration, they're pouring tons of money into it because they want to show it, they concede because they don't like the charters. So it's a whole dynamic. When it comes to things like the cafeteria, transportation, all of that, by and large, all the charters run independent transportation networks like I did.
Hmm.
And they, in some cases, they pull it together. So they do it together.
Does
Two,
that mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, does that mean like you have like drop off points where, you know, like a certain at this park, we'll pick you
yeah,
up and
that's
you
what
drop your
we would
kid off
do.
there? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what we would do. And that's what it seems like a lot of the Louisiana schools are doing. And then when it comes to cafeterias, I don't know what the rule is. I think they have generally the same space use requirements, only because
Yeah.
I've been to dozens of schools there, charters, and every one of them has a traditional cafeteria with a traditional like lunch system and all of that.
Yeah.
Your state is special, I have to say. Like
Oh, yeah.
Arizona has a way more laissez-faire charter market, and
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not an expert on Arizona's market, but it
Mhm.
has a reputation as being Wild West, pun intended, for charters, and
Yeah.
so they are the least regulated of all the
Yep.
different state charters, for better or worse. Some people would say that's good, some people would say that's bad, but they have way fewer restrictions than a lot of other states.
Yeah, there's not a lot of restrictions. And we also don't have a strong teachers union. So it's almost, I mean, there is one, but, like public school teachers don't really belong to it very much.
Right.
Um, so, and I know that charters are different from teacher union, but in getting that pushback from the unions, like you're not going to get any.
Right.
And then,
Sorry to-
yeah, with vouchers as well, that creates a whole other problem.
Sorry to break in here, guys. We've
No,
got
you're fine.
one more hand and we're running out of time. So I just wanted to bring
Thank
her
you.
up next. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you,
Yeah, thanks.
Ellen.
Yeah.
Good to see you. I love hearing all these different perspectives.
All right, Murphy.
America, you wild
Maggie.
country.
Sure. Hi.
And Bridget, thank you for doing this. As always, you are amazing. I love you. Ravi, your insights have been really helpful. They've been really interesting to hear the perspective of like on the ground, what's happening in the schools over like a decade of, and what a decade it's been, especially in the place that you've been working in. So that's super interesting to hear.
Oh, thank you.
I actually come from no education. My whole upbringing was hyper religious Christian schools and then homeschool for high school. So that was very weird. And I did not want that. I saw the shortcomings of that. So when I have my daughter who's now in high school, I've been trying to figure out what to do with her and just seeing what's happening. Um, so there's a million things I could say, but just to have some observations about what youth means right now and how I feel sorry for her and for kids in that age bracket, for people in education, because, well, for one thing, anyone who's been in book club with me knows I love books. I was raised by the library basically, and books are going away. They're like leaving. The screens are coming in the way of physical books and audiobooks too, which are delightful but not the same. So this discovery of browsing a physical library is, it's going away, and that's going to very seriously affect children going forward. So that's important to me. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. I
Just,
disagree. I
yeah.
totally agree. I don't. It sounds like I said disagree. I just agree. I said, I've been starting to write books. I wrote a novel this year, and I've got a book coming out
Ooh.
next year. And I love the idea. I think that books have more staying power. You know, like we do a video. You know, I have this podcast I record every Wednesday on this huge network called the Midas Network. It's like the super lefty network, and we get like 100,000, 200,000 people watch every week.
Congratulations.
It's like a tree falling in the wood, but it is a tree falling in the woods though. Like the next week, it's as if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like, you know, whereas the book will be a fraction of that. You know, my next book is with a bigger publisher, but it'll be a fraction of the amount of people. But the people who took the time to read that are affected in such a different way. You know, like I was at the U.S. Open the other day, and a guy who both listens to my podcasts and had read my book happened to be sitting next to me and recognized me and said, and this doesn't happen to me very often, but he said, "Hey, like I'm podcast listener," and all he wanted to do is talk about the novel because, like, obviously, if you take in that kind of time, it is a deeper experience, and I would rather have a much smaller audience and connect on that way than have like a bigger audience that feels a little less deep of a relationship, you know, if that makes sense. And what I love about Bridget, and not to kiss your ass, Bridget, but what I love about what you do is you always have a strong connection with your audience. Like in a way I don't with some, you know, I do my show that I was just describing on the Midas Network, and those people are largely there because of the brothers who run that network. And they don't give a shit who I am. So it's like, you know, I'm like almost like an MSNBC commentator to them. Like, you know, it's another face that gets on there. Whereas I think what you're doing, Bridget, is building an audience of people who connect on a personal level. So
But part of why I started this is because this show in particular, as well as a lot of the stuff, is that I felt the same way, even about writing, even writing a column, something would get a lot of traction on X or Twitter or whatever. There would be a big debate about it. We'd do a podcast and then it just dies. It's like you said, it's like a tree falling in the woods. And I can hear from people in comments or I'll see them in my community, but I really like actually seeing their faces and their backgrounds and their emotion and feeling Season's frustration, hearing that in her voice, you know,
Yeah.
hearing that is I feel like that's important, you know, so that it's not, we should, as people who are creating content, we should be hearing from our audience in a way that is more analog. Even though this is digital, it's still like a little bit more of a, I want to know how people are actually feeling, because I don't know that when I'm reading comments, it's like you and I, you know, you get a lot of noise too. Like you said, we hear a lot of stuff. Not
Right.
90% of it is you dumb whore.
Yeah.
And so and it starts to have this effect of me tuning everything out.
You get defensive too. Yeah.
You get defensive, but also it's like
I'm
the
not
if poem.
dumb.
The if poem where you're like not taking any of the flattery, you're not taking any of that. You're just like, I'm just gonna breezily let this all kind of roll off of me just so I can survive.
Well,
But that's not good either.
here's a good example. If I didn't know Season and I didn't look at her, hear her story, and she just tweeted at me, I think I shouldn't pay taxes, and we shouldn't have like basically like a semi-anarchist vision of the world, I would be like, it wouldn't land with me.
Right.
I'm not a mean person, so I wouldn't be like I wouldn't. That's not my style. Anybody who knows me on Twitter is like, I never argue with people. Even people who come at me, I thank them unless they truly insult me, and then I just try to ignore it. But what I heard is more important than a caricature, right? What I heard
Right.
is somebody who the system failed, and that's what I
Right.
take away from that. Not this narrow sense of like, okay, she has this belief that scares me a little bit. I'm like, oh well, she has an experience that people should be ashamed that they made her go through. And so what would otherwise be either an indifference or an opposition is like a sympathy, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to go on this journey with you. And that's only possible in kind of, even though this is a fast medium, right? Like we'll put this on YouTube and all of that. Um, there's something about that conversation that is critical.
And even she kept mentioning the IEP. And for people who don't know, can you quickly explain what an IEP is? It's basically, I worked with kids with autism, and we had to go through this to get money from the government, basically, to give people aids or whatever else the traditional public school system couldn't give these kids. In some instances, the kids had these micro schools because the regular school was not, they were too severely autistic to even be in the regular kind of gen pop of normal schools. And the IEP is a fucking nightmare. I cannot believe that they make people with special needs children go through this. It is insane. Like, I understand why, but it is to
It's a
put people,
compliance document.
but to put these
yeah.
people through what you have to go through as someone who already has an extra thing on their plate is like, there's got to be a better
It's
system.
a tool for compliance, and it's exactly, Season, I think, is picking up on this, I'm sure, is like, and I interviewed this guy, John White, who ran the Louisiana State he was the superintendent of the state, but also ran New Orleans schools for a while. And he talks about this. And I think he said this, and I can't remember if I put it in the episode for next week, because we talk about special education a lot. Something that went from, hey, the intentions in the beginning were good. It's like, okay, we want to like make sure that districts are providing services. So we're going to create these individualized education plans. Over time becomes, I am afraid that bureaucrats are going to come down on me, so I'm going to create all this paperwork. But
It's
it is not a
insane.
document that in any way in most schools yields good learning. A good school doesn't need that document. They'll create their own version of it better. And a bad school is just going to use it to paper over really bad practices and often neglect.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Sorry, that was my rant about the IEP. It like all came back to me having to go to like these hearings and all the paperwork. I was like,
Bullshit.
oh my God.
It's bullshit. And
crazy.
It's one of those things in a politically correct environment. A lot of people would come at me for saying that. They'll be like, you don't care about special education kids. Bullshit. I had
Like, no.
30% special education kids in some of my schools, and they're kids who I could tell you everything about them, and I never worked harder for any students. But it wasn't because of a document. I'm sorry.
Right. Right. Anything else, Murph?
Just to, what's been coming up a bit as we've been talking is relationship. Bridget, you were saying how this gives you a chance to have this relationship with people and really connect, and that's so valuable. One of the next big crises also coming is the experienced teachers are about to retire. That's a big fat crisis that's staring us in the face, of these really experienced teachers who know and understand the value of what education is falling off, and we're going to get a bunch of new
TikTok teachers.
I don't know. Yeah, something like that. That's a real reality. Rav, I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
I think it sometimes could be an opportunity. I think what New Orleans taught us is that sometimes being able to move on from the past can be an opportunity, but you have to seize it. It could actually just worsen things, which is a very likely scenario. But this is where real leadership comes in, and leadership doesn't have to come from the district; it can come at the school level. I went to a convention of parents who do homeschooling and or micro schools a couple of weeks ago by this organization called Vela, and they're associated with a group called Yes Every Kid. And it was interesting. It was Black inner city families and rural MAGA families all coming together, being like, I want to educate my kids and have like a limited experience like school, but then I also want them to play in the woods and do all the kind of stuff. And I was like, I'm with this. Like I gave the little keynote at the end, and I gave them a little rah-rah, and I was like, I like this energy. I think you're going to all go out and do great things. And like I support them having autonomy, and Season, I think you'd feel very at home with them. It's like people who just were like, F this, I'm taking it into my own hands. You know?
I love that. On that note, we'll wrap it up. Maggie's muted. She's still muted.
I'm muted. There we go. Thank you, Murphy.
Thank you.
I'm going to take you down and
Thanks,
Ravi.
guys.
It's such a pleasure. Tell everyone where we can find you and your work.
Yes, I dropped into the chat. I just started Substack 2 weeks ago, which I will be using
I
to
love
talk
what you
about.
wrote on there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just started it, and as a way to like chronicle everything non-political.
By the
Really,
way, you
so
said you were going
random
to send
stuff.
me your novel, and I never got that novel.
Oh shit, I didn't actually send that to you, but that's good because I'll send it to you before I leave now. I've got a stack of them sitting next to me. So I'll send you that. I have a novel called Garbage Town that just came out a couple months ago. It is all about growing up in the 90s in Staten Island. It's a coming of age story, but it's really a period piece. So you can go to Garbage Town wherever you get your books, Amazon, bookshop.org, etc. And then I host a show called The Lost Debate, which Bridget has been on before.
I
where
love that show.
kind of go on and just talk about like stuff. I have this other show I talked about, which is very political, but knowing this audience, I don't think that is like the right one for you.
They might like it.
It's called Majority 54. It's very partisan. Like I have a Democratic partisan operative part of my brain that I use on that show for 1 hour a week. And I largely go on my life not using that part of my brain. And hopefully there was very little evidence of that here, but for an audience like this, Lost Debate is your better show.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Lost Debate is great.
But yeah,
And where can we
love
find
y'all.
you online so we can bully
at
you?
Ravi M. Gupta on Instagram. I'm way more active on Instagram than Twitter X. I tweet maybe once a week, and I use it mostly for research. But Instagram, I'm very active, and I'll be posting from Italy all my culinary journeys. So people
Can't
can
wait.
So
Thank you,
I
Ravi.
love this community. Thank you so much, and Bridget.
Yeah, thank you,
thank you so
Ravi.
much for
Thanks
having me
for
on.
coming through, and great timing. And everybody check Ravi out and all of his work and follow his adventures in Italy. Maybe we'll come visit. I'll bring the child husband, teach us to cook bolognese. My favorite. All right. Thank you to our guest, Ravi Gupta. Thank you to those of you who showed up and asked questions. Thank you to Two Way and their amazing team. Thank you, Maggie. Muted.
Thank you, Bridget.
And thank you, Quest, for sponsoring this show. Visit questhealth.com and use discount code RealMay25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com, code RealMay25 for 20% off. Thank you guys for getting real with me. I'm Bridget Phetasy. Don't forget to tip your server.